Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yes, wonderful. I'm Ellen Herman, the co-director of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics and a professor of history here at U of O. We're thrilled that each and every one of you could join us tonight. Thank you so much for coming to hear Peter DeFazio talk about democracy, the challenges ahead. The mission of the Wayne Morse Center is to promote civic engagement, inclusive democracy, and justice by bringing together students, scholars, activists, policymakers, members of community, people just like you. We discuss a wide range of issues affecting Oregon, the nation, and the world, and we work in the tradition of Oregon Senator Wayne Morse, who believed that political independence and education were the building blocks of justice and democracy. Many of you are on our mailing list already. That's great. If you aren't or you're not sure, please feel free to add your name. If you duplicate, you'll still only get one email message from us about events like this. It's right on the table right outside the room here. We have lots of interesting events coming up in the months ahead. Some of you may have seen this flyer on the table. The events are about communications platforms for democracy, about guns and the NRA, about how the heartland turned red, and we will hear this spring from Anita Hill and Nicholas Kristof. Please come to those events. I'd like to thank all of my amazing colleagues at the Wayne Morse Center, Rebecca Dinwoody, Abby Stilley, Dan Titchener, and Christine Waite. All of them are here, so you can thank them if you would like. Along with our student workers, Camilla Fazal, Emma Gunn, and Kavi Shrestha. To the students, definitely. We're especially grateful to many of you in the audience who are already members of the Wayne Morse Circle. Circle membership provides critical support for our programs and events like this one through annual donations in any amount. Please consider supporting our work and becoming a Circle member. The Wayne Morse Center has been bringing you events like this one for 24 years. And with your support, we look forward to many, many more decades of events like this one. Peter DeFazio occupies this year's Wayne Morse Chair. We are thrilled by that, not least because we know that Wayne Morse is a particular hero to Peter DeFazio. Yesterday, we had him, our current Wayne Morse Chair, literally sit in Wayne Morse's chair in the law school. Some of you may have seen that picture on social media. Peter DeFazio needs very little introduction to most of you, and I know you want to hear from him. Let me simply mention that he came to Oregon to get an MA here at U of O. He was elected to the Lane County Board of Commissioners in 1983 and went on to serve for 36 years as the U.S. representative from Oregon's 4th Congressional District. That is, of course, our district. And it makes him the longest-serving member of Congress in Oregon history. He accomplished many things in Congress, including co-founding the Congressional Progressive Caucus and chairing the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he played a very important role in passing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is surely one of the most transformative pieces of legislation to come out of Washington, D.C. in recent years. What I want to leave you with is my appreciation for the qualities that make him like Wayne Morse. And very unfortunately, in my view, there's practically no room on the American political scene right now for figures like Wayne Morse. But Peter DeFazio is tenacious. He is committed to principle over politics. Even his nickname, the Tiger of the House, connected him to the Tiger of the Senate. There is no one I would rather hear from about the challenges facing democracy today, including perhaps some solutions to those problems, than Peter DeFazio. Join me in welcoming him. You go up the steps if you want.
Well, thanks everybody for the greeting. It is truly an honor to occupy the honorary chair for the Morse Center this year. I had in my office in one corner a picture of Wayne, and he and I had a lot of late night conversations about how pathetic things had become in D.C. over the years when I was there. You know, his legacy was just astounding, and I'm so honored. I think that this is one of the most critical years that will confront us in terms of our system of government, the future of our system of government. There could be no more important election than the election of '24. But I'm going to start a ways back. Some of the seeds of where we're at today were actually planted by the founders of our nation. I've got to move things so I'll be able to flip pages. Here we go. Put these down here. Don't need those anymore. You know, first we started with the Articles of Confederation. We had weak national government, one state veto. There was turmoil in a lot of the states, particularly regarding policies around taxation and debt. You know, after it was a new country, we had tremendous debts. Merchants wanted hard coin, silver, gold. The artisans and the agrarian sector didn't have that, and there was tremendous turmoil. There was also a lot of speculation on war bonds. Sounds kind of familiar. And yet they were being forced to be repaid at full amount, and people thought they shouldn't have to be repaid at full amount. There was one standout during that era, which was Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania adopted an incredibly progressive constitution in 1776, unicameral legislature, weak executive. They limited the requirement to own property to vote. They had no debtor prisons. They funded public education by taxing property, with a property tax. They had one-year terms, 7-year term limits, and they had proportional representation. All the states varied and were different, but this one really stood out. But that was not what our founders wanted. That was like their least favorite, probably, of the existing state systems. They were adamantly opposed to that. And then Alexander Hamilton and Elbridge Gerry feared, quote, an excess of democracy. And Edmund Randolph from Virginia said, the evils under which the U.S. labored were found in the turbulence and follies of democracy. They were inspired by Montesquieu, who said a separation of powers should be done to create competing entities so that we will have stasis. Little will get done. And Madison always referred to Montesquieu as the oracle. So our founders, didn't come here with the idea of a tremendously majoritarian democracy, and they then decided how they were going to construct it. They divided the House and Senate with different modes of election and times of election. They debated the process to choose the Senate and its makeup for months. We finally had the Connecticut Compromise. The House would be elected by popular vote. The Senate each state would get 2 senators, so much for equal representation. But Madison feared that if we didn't do that, the other states would not sign on. You know, that was the senators. And they were appointed by the states until the 17th Amendment in 1913. The founders put in place 7 filters, 7 places where we could stop sort of the maddening crowd from taking over or a real robust democracy. Bicameral legislature, House, Senate, first 2, Electoral College, number 3, Supreme Court, 4, the states who could set their own process for governance, you know, that we've seen in recent years with gerrymandering, which I'll get into a lot later, has had pretty extraordinary you know, effect on the state houses. And the state houses, of course, when they draw up the maps, they constitute the congressional maps. And in fact, between 68 and 16, the party with fewer votes won state houses 121 times and state senate 146 times. We'll spend a fair amount of time on gerrymandering, which is a problem for the House and for the states. And the Constitution with 2/3 House, 2/3 Senate, and 3/4 of states. Scholars say it is the most difficult Constitution of any country in the world to amend. Many others have I don't think. Well, I guess we got emphasis on that. Are we okay back there? Nothing fell on you? All right. Okay. You know, and then number 7, the president with veto power. So 7 filters. So the seeds of government dysfunction were really planted by our founders, but now new threats have evolved. And I'll go on to examine the problems of the House, the Senate, presidency, the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, and a couple of other new problems. The House was designed to be, you know, more reflect the popular will of the people. They said an exact portrait of the people, but with the check of the Senate and the president with veto power. The founders left room for Congress and the states to experiment. Article 1, Section 4, time, place, manner by each state and legislature thereof, but Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulation, except places of choosing senators. That's important when we get to talking about gerrymandering. So states could set, and they did, some set proportional representation, district representation, statewide votes, block voting. They had a whole series of different ways to elect people. 1790, we had 105 representatives. They each represented 34,000 people. The last time that we expanded the House of Representatives in 1911 to 435. Each representative had 265,000 constituents. As of 2022, the average is 766,000 constituents each. So now we'll begin to talk about the House and the problems in the House. This is what I call, and I've found that in some scholarly work, the 4-party era. And that was from the 60s till roughly 1994 when Newt Gingrich got elected. And what you had was, you had liberal Democrats, conservative Democrats, moderate Democrats, conservative Republicans, moderate Republicans, liberal Republicans. You had a wide overlap, 85, 90 people. So they essentially could moderate the extremes. It was a pretty stable era, and there was a lot of working across the aisle. Then comes Newt Gingrich with his bomb throwing. And, then after Newt got elected, in that area that began to shrink. It was frowned upon, but not yet absolutely sort of prohibited to work across the aisle. And again, but you can see that the area of cooperation, potential cooperation, has shrunk. So they're going to have much less impact on who's ever in control. So therefore, there was still some bipartisan things that happened, and occasional times that control was lost, but not a lot. Then we had the Tea Party era, the big blowout. And again, this area shrunk dramatically after the Tea Party era, and the Republicans took over the House again, went through a number of speakers, and then finally, the current era, the MAGA era. There is no intersection. There are no liberal Republicans left. There are some sane Republicans left, conservative, sane Republicans left, but there are no liberal Republicans left in the House. After 2010, most of the blue dog Democrats lost their races. A lot of them were from the South. Very few conservative Democrats are still left. So what you find is no intersection at this point in time. And you've seen that through the dysfunction, particularly this year with McCarthy being tossed out and Johnson having trouble governing because of, I no longer say these are conservatives, these are ultra conservatives or right-wing nuts over here. So those are the changes in the House, and a lot of that can be attributed to gerrymandering. And speech is mixed up. Hold on a second. I was using a defective Xerox machine. There we go. All right. We're getting back in order. Yep. Okay. So, there were, some changes. The Supreme Court ruled in, back in, if I can find that page, 2A, 2F. Yeah, I don't know if that one's any better, Murray. The machine kept spinning things in the wrong direction. Sorry about this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So from 67, elections were mixed. Some people were elected at large. And so, from 46 to 62, many districts had huge imbalances in population. And then finally in 62, the Supreme Court ruled that they should be roughly equal protection under the 14th Amendment. And that also was put in place with the anticipation that after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, that some southern states would move to statewide voting to preclude any African Americans getting elected. So that reined them in a little bit. So that was this era. It worked pretty well. But as things hardened, it's now devolved tremendously. The first attempt at a gerrymander, interestingly enough, I did a little research for this, was actually the first Congress. And anti-federalist Patrick Henry tried to preclude Madison's election to Congress. And so the state legislature drew a district that they thought would pack, which is part of what they do with gerrymandering. You pack and crack. You try and pack someone's district with people of one party, or crack it and make them all their votes meaningless by spreading them all around. Well, he tried packing. Unfortunately, he didn't have modern tools, and Madison still won the election. So it didn't get a name, even though he invented, or at least was the first person to attempt a gerrymander. But then, the gerrymander, God, these are all mixed up. Okay. All right, here we go. And then, the Supreme Court took up the case, and that said that the redistricting would no longer be tied to the decennial census. The Republicans took over the Texas legislature for the first time in 30 years, and they redistricted in 2004. The House delegation went from 17D, 15R to 21R, 11D in one election. And then in 2010, as well documented in the book Rat, if you've read the book, it's a pretty good book, documents essentially when the Republicans became very determined to control all of the process in as many states as possible of redistricting. They had Operation Red Map. They targeted 16 states. They flipped 700 legislative seats. They had a new software, it's gotten more sophisticated now, called Maptitude. They cracked and packed. The Republicans kept the House with a 30-seat margin, despite 1.4 million votes for Democrats. And ultimately, litigation regarding gerrymandering made its way to the United States Supreme Court in 2019. The court ruled it was beyond its judicial capabilities to deal with gerrymandering, that it was a non-justicable political controversy, despite the guarantee clause, Article 4, that each state shall have a Republican form of government. The court said, no, that's the responsibility of Congress to fix that. So there is a path there, which I'll get to in a minute, but there's one other important ruling. I mean, the Supreme Court did rule 5-4 in 2015. I don't know how they would rule today, that bipartisan independent commissions could write the maps for congressional districts. 8 states have independent commissions of varying form. Some are way better than others. 2 have legislative override. So federal legislation could be passed. Zoe Lofgren in the last Congress in which I served had a bill which was constitutional to impose, with really good standards, independent redistricting commissions across all of the states to help deal with and try and move back to here, or at least back to here, given how much more political polarization we have, but not being at this point where we're stuck now. I mean, if you're a Republican, all you worry about is MAGA in your primary, and if you're a Democrat, all you worry about is a lefty in your primary, and there's only 35 to 40 seats that are truly competitive outside of a wave year election. I held one of those seats for many years, and when I finally ended my tenure, it had morphed from a Democratic seat to a Republican +2 seat. It now, with redistricting, and Josephine County is out, Lynn County's out, half of Douglas is out, and Newport's in, so it actually is now a D+4 district. Some people say the Democrats had, gerrymandered here. I think actually there's a pretty fair, fair map for this state, given the fact we have 2 Republicans elected, and when you look at, when you look at the distribution around the state. But in any case, we could put all questions aside with independent commissions. Question is, would this Supreme Court, since the last one was 5-4, allow independent commissions? We won't know. So that's an unanswered question, but that could be a solution. Congress could also mandate proportional voting instead of first past the post. You know, most of our peer democracies have proportional multi-member districts. And then, you know, we could also increase the size of the House. Remember, it's been frozen since, you know, the early part of the last century. And you're representing 766,000 people. There are a lot of senators who don't represent 766,000 people. And that's, you know, that's a big constituency to be close to and be in touch with. So, you know, some portion of, you know, if you had independent commissions or if you had proportional representation with an enlarged House, we could solve a lot of the problems of gerrymandering and perhaps bring the House back to a much more functional state. Speaking of functional states, we move on to the Senate. You know, the construct of the Senate, as I mentioned earlier, was considered a very necessary compromise, the Connecticut Compromise. Madison said, you know, we had to deal with the political realities of the moment. At its inception, it defied equal representation. Virginia, the largest state, had 13 times the population of Delaware. But that was a difference of 700,000 people. Fast forward to today, 2020. California has 68 times the population of Wyoming. The difference is 38.5 million people. So essentially, a person in Wyoming has 68 times the electoral power of someone in the state of Wyoming, of California. So, you know, and by 2040, a majority of the Senate will be elected by 30% of the population of the United States. That is, some of these things I'm going to talk about have solutions. That one is very difficult to deal with, requiring, remember, the hardest constitution of a democracy in the world to amend. You know, we're a little bit stuck with the Senate. I mean, perhaps I've thought about, well, what if you know, said, well, we're going to make it a little more proportional, but you'll get more senators. But even if you could get the states to agree, remember how you're going to have to go to 3/4 of the states after we get the Senate and the House to agree. And it's likely that those little states are not going to agree to anything that makes it a little bit more balanced. Some advocate a constitutional convention. All of the scholars, or most of the scholars, say there is no way to control a constitutional convention, which would put everything we have, the Bill of Rights and everything else, at jeopardy. So that doesn't seem to be a way to do it. I mean, we did get at least the one major reform was direct election of senators in 1913. In 1981, 24 states had divided Senate delegations. In 2002, 25 states were divided. And that has to do in part with geographic sorting, which is different than every other problem we're dealing with. People moving to places where they feel more comfortable with the social structure and their neighbors and the environment. Now, the filibuster is something, and if we had fixed the filibuster some time ago, we might not be in the mess we are today. You know, Hamilton was opposed, saying it was one of the main problems with the Articles of Confederation. You know, and there's nothing in the Constitution. It's only Senate rules. The House actually decided that they wouldn't go that direction. Starting in 1811, they put in something called the previous question. The filibuster wasn't used a whole lot during the 1800s. During World War I, Woodrow Wilson's urging, the Senate adopted a rule finally for cloture. You know, I mean, there have been famous filibusters since we're talking about Wayne. Wayne carried one on for 22 hours, 26 minutes, standing, talking, no breaks, standing, talking. He was opposing the corrupt Tidelands legislation. During the Civil Rights Act, it was filibustered over 75 hours over 60 days. Now, that wasn't like Wayne. Wayne stood up there all that time. This was, they started to loosen up and saying, oh, well, you can take a break. Well, how are you going to break a filibuster if they can take a break, go out and have dinner, drinks with their buddies, and come back later? You know, there have been proposals. Jeff Merkley, in particular, has been a leader on attempting to modify the filibuster. But you know, now the filibuster is you don't have to debate. One senator can say, "I object," and the bill's held up, which is absolutely absurd. Now, you know, the filibuster has changed recently. 2013, Harry Reid used it to establish a majority vote for judges because all the judges were getting held up by the filibuster. But then the Republicans did that for the Supreme Court. So, you know, there is some danger in doing away with the filibuster. On the other hand, it has crippled Democratic majorities in getting things done. Obamacare was a result of the threat of filibuster after Teddy Kennedy's death. The House bill was phenomenally better than the Senate bill. And then, unfortunately, after Teddy Kennedy died and the threat of the filibuster in the Senate, we ended up with the Senate version of Obamacare. It did away with the very robust public option. It did away with my language to take away antitrust immunity from the health insurance industry and a host of other progressive things that came out of the House. So the filibuster can be good, it can be bad. And that's something to be thought about as we try. I mean, at least you could require a talking filibuster like the old days. You know, you can stand up for as many hours as you can, but when you fall down, then we're going to call the question. So, you know, there's other ways to do it. Others have proposed a step-down process, that there would be a series of votes after so many hours, and it would start at 60 and would ultimately get down to 50 or 51. There are numerous ways that the filibuster could be modified. So that could help the Senate, but we still have the problem of the disproportionate clout of a minority of the country in electing the United States Senate. Now, the presidency, again, one of the filters, you know, that they put in place. You know, there was a lot of debate at the Constitutional Convention. You know, should it be a popular vote or the Electoral College? Well, again, given the prejudice of the founders, Electoral College won out. Then they set up how would the Electoral College be constituted? And then that became a controversy because you had slaves, and you know, the northern states, it should be done by you know, just by you know, population, who can, you know, voting population. You know, the South wanted to say, well, no, the slaves are going to count, even though they can't vote, toward allocating representatives and the Electoral College. And again, a compromise was reached, a 3/5 compromise for slaves in allocating representatives and electors. You know, but back then, the founders, at that point, they didn't think we were going to have parties. I don't know why, but they assumed that, you know, that even by that system, the electors would have individual discretion. You know, that hasn't happened a lot. In fact, over time, every state except Nebraska and Maine has said the electors go to the majority vote in the state. In Nebraska, it's done by congressional district, and then the Senate votes. In this election and the last election, there's one district in Nebraska that's a swing district. There will be tens of billions of dollars spent in that one district to try and get one electoral vote. And if they think Jared Golden in Maine is vulnerable, they'll be spending a pile of money up there too. Because it could, if it comes to a tie, that would be the critical vote. So both parties will be doing this because of the bizarre nature of the Electoral College and the potential for a tie. And you know, they also, in thinking that it would be a fractured vote, they thought, well, it would go to the House. And so the system for the House, again, is, you know, a bit obscure to most people, but it's one state, one vote. So again, I mean, in terms of dealing with representation, California gets one vote, Wyoming gets one vote for president. And this became an issue during the Trump campaign. A lot of people didn't notice it, but I did. It said in campaigning against Joe Biden in Pittsburgh in September, he started rattling on, as he does, but he said, you know, that if the Electoral College doesn't vote, if they don't meet, if they don't come to a conclusion, I'm president. I'm president. Every state gets one vote. I'm president. So I would say that was the seeds of the backup plan that led ultimately to the attempted coup, which was, okay, maybe we can win the election. If we can't win the election, there's another way to do this. That, you know, actually happened. You know, there have only been 2 elections decided in the House. The last one was in 1824. But 5 times now we've had presidents elected without a majority: 1824, 76, 88, 2000, Bush, and 2016, Trump. And, you know, in 16, Trump won Florida, Miami, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin by 191,000 votes out of 23 million. And in 2020, Biden won Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin with 124,000 votes out of 19 million. Pretty narrow. So what happens is all the focus is going to be on probably 10 states and 2 congressional districts. You know, it hasn't always been that way. From the 50s until the 80s, there were 26 states that were considered in play in presidential elections. But now it's all boiled down to this because of the Electoral College. Now, there have been 700 proposals over time in Congress to reform the Electoral College. Not a real popular thing. None of them have gotten anywhere because, again, it requires a constitutional amendment. But there is proposed now a system to end run the Electoral College as is, the National Popular Vote Compact. 16 states plus the District of Columbia have signed on. They have 205 electoral votes. And the deal is when they get to 270, if we ever get to 270, then the majority vote will be cast in those states. And, you know, that's also probably going to be challenged by in the Supreme Court, one would expect. But that is one way to get around it. You know, the other thing we did fix, the electoral vote count. You know, we all saw the show where, you know, that, you know, Trump's people were saying to Pence he can change things. Doesn't have, you know, he could just take care of it. Well, we've clarified the vague language. That's been taken care of. But what was really going on that day was, if they had gotten a hold of those ballot boxes, it's 2 antique boxes with paper envelopes that the vice president opens and announces, sent by the states. And if the clerks, the pages in the Senate hadn't run off the floor and hidden those boxes, and the crowd had gotten one of those boxes, then we would have had to go back to those states and say, reconfirm send us another letter. Well, by then, Georgia, Arizona, and other states would have said, no, 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 that's not the way the election went. So we would have, potentially been in real trouble. And there was also a deadline, and the states could just say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't get that done, we're not in session. And then it would have gone to the House. So that was, in my mind, I think that was the backup plan to take over the country. So now, let's talk a little bit about the presidency and where we're headed with the presidency. 4A, 4B, yes, it is. Look at that. Never should trust that machine. There is now a lot of discussion of something that has been pretty fringe for a long time, but has been pushed by Heritage and others since Ronald Reagan, which is called the unitary executive theory. And they use the vesting clause, Article 3, the executive power of the United States shall be vested in a president of the United States of America with the provision, with this provision, and the take care clause, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. They're saying, well, that means the president is totally in charge of the executive branch. There can be no independent agencies, et cetera. In its extreme form. Back with Reagan, John Dean said, in its most extreme form, the unitary executive theory can mean neither Congress nor the courts can tell the president what to do or how to do it, particularly regarding national security matters. Well, they've now broadened that to any matter in their interpretation. Under Bush, Cheney, who now is an anti-Trumper, but he pushed this theory, Calabresi and you, they pushed that theory, and President Bush made it a regular point in signing, statements of bills saying, I believe these sections are, unconstitutional, or that I can modify these sections of the bill. And of course, Trump has run around talking about, I have an Article 2. I have an Article 2, and that will let me do whatever I want. No independent agencies. No Federal Reserve, independent, no Federal Trade Commission, et cetera. They proposed Schedule F, which was to make a minimum of 50,000, there are right now 4,000 political appointees, to have a minimum of 50,000 political appointees in the civil service. That would roll us back to the 1880s when Congress passed the Pendleton Act, after the assassination of Garfield by a disgruntled constituent who didn't get the appointment he wanted. And they said, well, let's put an end to this and let's have a professional government. They really don't think that they call it the deep state. You heard that a lot from Bannon, but it's way more widespread. Trump's former head of OMB, Russell Vought, now head of the Center for Reviving America. I would hope this is a seminal moment to crush the deep state that has operated with its own set of agendas for a long time. The Heritage Foundation has something called Project 2025. You can find it online, 825 pages long. Each chapter deals with one or another agency of the government and what will be done with them. There will be slash the DOJ, eliminate the FBI, eliminate Department of Homeland Security, eliminate the Department of Education, Department of Commerce, and so on and so forth under this theory. They have 100, Heritage has 100 partners and a lot of dark money. And what they're doing is they're not only giving an ideological basis for overturning our professional government, our civil service, but they're also vetting the people who will do that, so they won't make mistakes. In fact, I looked online today, and they have a school that you can apply to go to, and then get vetted to be running an agency or something. I didn't apply. I didn't think I would get through. There's also been loose talk about invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807, which would be extraordinary. So, you know, we are really looking at a, you know, a very, very important and difficult presidential election. So now we move on to what's the bulwark? Do we have a bulwark? The United States Supreme Court. Well, in Marbury versus Madison, 1803, the court, they arrogated themselves, it wasn't in the Constitution, the authority to overturn acts of Congress. So it's actually not based in the Constitution. You know, at that point, they struck down Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789, and they announced that American courts have the power to invalidate laws they find violate the Constitution. So that hasn't been challenged. You know, and we've had some pretty miserable rulings out of the Supreme Court over the years, particularly Dred Scott. African Americans couldn't claim citizenship, so could not bring a suit to federal court. Missouri Compromise, unconstitutional because it deprives citizens of their property without due process of law, i.e. slaves. You know, these things, you know, we nullified a lot with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments after the Civil War. You know, still, they have a lot of latitude. FDR, you know, was confronted with a very reluctant court who kept trying to kill his New Deal programs, well, did kill his New Deal programs. So he proposed the Judicial Reform Procedures Bill that would enlarge the court packing. And then one of the justices started and changed his vote. So then the New Deal was able to move forward. The court was and can be subject to political or perhaps popular pressure. And that's a point at which it worked. Then we had, you know, some great rulings. Roe versus Wade, of course, overturned by Dobbs on September 22. We had the Voting Rights Act, you know, passed by Congress in 72, 74. And that was gutted in 2013 in Shelby 5-4 that repealed Section 4 so that there would no longer be a pre-clearance requirement because the court said, well, those states used to be really oppressive and regressive and discriminatory, but that's old data. You have to come up with new data and prove that they're still doing that. Well, the day after the ruling, they started doing it. You know, have done it in many, many ways to suppress the vote and suppress the, you know, with purging voting rolls, with where they distribute voting machines. Poor black neighborhoods get one machine for 10,000 people, and an affluent white suburb gets 10 for 1,000 people. Or whatever that we've seen around the country. Unfortunately, we've lost that tool. And now we have another case coming toward the Supreme Court from the 8th Circuit saying there can be no private right of action and only the Justice Department can bring a suit for violation of the Voting Rights Act. You know, this court has also vitiated the Clean Water Act. They have vitiated parts of the Clean Air Act, and now they've got a biggie. They just argued it. This will be extraordinary. This case is from 1964, and it was Chevron versus the Natural Resources Defense Council, when the court decided that with complex laws and complex regulations, that due deference should be given to the scientists and experts at the agency in terms of how that complied with and enforced the law passed by Congress. But now this case brought by two fishing boats who are required to have observers on them, which should have been kind of a little minor case, but now they've expanded it to question the whole doctrine of regulation. And the arguments, the way the arguments went, it's very likely they are going to overturn that judgment, meaning any judge anywhere can exert their judgment as, over a federal agency. There have been 19,000 cases that have been settled to defer to the agencies over those 40 years. And now they're going to potentially turn that topsy-turvy. So we need to reform the Supreme Court, and that we can do. Just think of the court we have today. All 6 appointed judges are in the Federalist Society. 5 of 6 were appointed by a president who lost the popular vote. So we could try expansion a la FDR. I mean, I think they're really overworked and they really need more help. We could do term limits. Now, you are a judge for life, but you're not necessarily a Supreme Court justice for life. So we could impose term limits, and then they would go to senior status. We could change by statute the way justices are chosen, again, not prescribed by the Constitution, and say that each president can get to appoint 2 in a term, 1 in their first term and 1 in their second term. So not one president could pack the whole court, and so you would have that. Congress could, as I mentioned earlier, the Constitution didn't set out and enumerate all of their powers. Constitution, Congress could limit their jurisdiction. Say, no, you don't have jurisdiction over highly technical issues that relate to the environment and that, or at least to civil liberties or this or that. Congress could do that. We would be in a little bit of constitutional crisis when the Supreme Court would say, well, no, we're ruling against that. But you could also pass a law requiring a supermajority on the court, saying they can't overturn laws passed by Congress with a mere majority. So there's hope there. Of course, there's also, future presidents and future elections and the court turning over. And then finally, now, one thing we took for granted, well, particularly post-Gore Bush with hanging chads, was let's fix the way we elect people. We had those machines here too, and I don't want to embarrass Murray, but on my first re-election, I'm at home eating breakfast. I've been out doing it's like a nice calm day. I'm going to be quiet on election day. I don't bother anybody. And she comes roaring into the driveway and she says, "I didn't vote for you." And I said, "Well, thanks." And she says, "Well, you weren't on the ballot. You didn't see your name." And the county had to save space. You had these little pages you would flip and then you would punch, and you would flip and then you would punch. There were like 11 candidates for president, and at the very bottom of the page, after you voted for president, in very small print, it was Congress, vote for 1, and there were 2 names. And in those days, they collected the ballots, and you knew by the part of the day how things were going. Later, they would say, okay, here's because they would process the ballots. They say, okay, this is the 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. ballots. Well, during the 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. ballots, there was a 40% undervote in the race for Congress. So, and we had a big fight with the county to say, you've got to post the signs. Oh, we're not posting these. I said, the sign should just say there is a place to vote for Congress. Choose your candidate. I said, you're not prejudicing the election. So they finally put up signs, and the numbers dropped. So then Congress, after Gore versus Bush and hanging Chad, said, okay, we put a lot of money out to the states. Unfortunately, the Republicans objected to, prescribing exactly what kind of systems we'd have to have. Until very recently, until about 5 years ago, there were 12 states, or 6 years ago, that had electronic-only systems. No way to go back and check it. Now there's only 1 state left that has an electronic-only system. Anybody want to guess? Deep South. Louisiana. Yeah, they have an electronic-only system. Huey long lives. So Anyway, but most states now have a backup with the paper ballot, which can be counted. And, you know, in the case of all the false claims about Georgia, I mean, they ran the system again, no discrepancies. And then people said, no, we still don't believe it. So they hand counted all the ballots and found virtually no discrepancies. Yet there was still all of this myth about the election was stolen and blah, blah, blah. So, and we have seen across the country, a lot of election workers have left. And in some cases, unfortunately, people have been elected who are election deniers to positions where they are going to be running the elections in those areas. So that's another area where, you know, where we have solutions. I mean, people are going to have to, you know, get involved in that process, and you know, however it's being done in your, you know, in the state or in the county. Who's ever in charge of counting, run for that office, volunteer to be on the election, and do those sorts of things. So that one hopefully will pass. But that is frightening to think that even at the end of the process, we're going to have those sorts of problems. So that's a few of the issues confronting the future of our representative democracy. And you know, I'd be happy to take a few questions. And sorry that the Xerox machine mixed up my papers, but we got through it. So, okay. They have microphones, and you'll come to you if you raise your hand. And
Why don't we start on one side and then we'll go to the other?
All
okay.
right. We'll start over here. Wait, where did I hear that? See that? Okay, there you go.
Hey, Peter, thanks. As I look out over this particular audience, I'm wondering if you have any reflections on the significance of generational issues and how that's affecting the shift in focus on different approaches to democracy.
Well, I'm a little disappointed there aren't more students here, but I just met yesterday with a group of, I don't know, 35 or 40 law students. And then about 2 weeks ago, met with a bunch of the Wayne Morse scholars. And I was excited by their attitude, their knowledge, their determination. And, you know, I mean, I think that there is hope. I mean, we did see in the last presidential election, there was a much higher than had been, you know, expected or normal youth vote. I mean, forever, you know, we've been saying, well, you know, you're getting the short end of the stick because you're not voting, and they haven't paid much attention. Now they seem to be paying attention a little bit more, and we need to motivate them, and they have all sorts of, you know, I mean, who's the pop star got 1 million people to register in a day? Yeah. Huh? Did she? Okay, good. So, you know, I think we can, and then it's up to, once you get them registered, then we got to have good organizations to get them to vote. We've done great job. I mean, the job we've done here at the U of O over the years has been phenomenal in some close elections. So, I think there are young people. They've got right now. It's a school. You know, it's a college school night. You know, they're busy studying, I'm sure, or maybe.
We did have
but,
some.
You know.
We did have some students from South Eugene High School here this
Great.
evening.
All right, congratulations. Thank you. Okay. All right, questions?
Hi, Pete. I wonder if you would comment on this latest ploy by the Republicans in several states trying to remove as many people from the voting rolls as possible.
Well, that would have been covered under the Voting Rights Act previously. And in fact, we did pass, in honor of my friend and the great civil rights leader, John Lewis, we did pass the John Lewis Act in the House before I retired. to restore the Voting Rights Act and to restore justice oversight, of those states that are doing those sorts of things, and that would have been ruled illegal. Unfortunately, it didn't pass or didn't come up in the Senate. So, we could restore the Voting Rights Act in some future Congress and prevent that. But no, that it has been used widely. They use other things in Texas. If you have a student ID, you can't vote. But if you have I don't even know if they have licenses for guns, but there's something else that was kind of the opposite. If you had that, you could vote. I don't know, maybe just a piece of paper saying I'm a red-blooded citizen, you could vote. I'm not a student, but no, they've done all sorts of things to do that, we haven't quite got back to the literacy chest, which you have to pay for, but they're trying.
Okay, we got some.
Thanks. Great talk, Peter. What really confounds me, though, is the state of the Supreme Court right now. It seems that the nomination process for a new justice is just whatever random things certain senatorial leaders or the president comes up with. It's like it doesn't seem to be as regulated as many other things are. And it seems that if people lie during their hearings, that nobody comes back. I mean, like they can lie, that it's okay. Can you speak to this process of appointing Supreme Court judges, and is there any movement to improve it?
Well, yeah, at one point, I remember after Citizens United, Justice Roberts had said he would be bound by, previous decisions. And they overturned a lot of previous decisions to decide Citizens United. So I went to Auka, my legislative director, and I said, I want articles of impeachment on Roberts. And he said, I'll quit. And I said, why? He said, well, because I worked for Kucinich, and he did articles of impeachment against Bush, and that was all we did. And once we did that. So I said, okay. So I didn't introduce the articles of impeachment, but he lied. That was one of the more blatant lies. And the others, kind of weasel around. I don't know how, all of the current justices have been vetted, recommended by the Federalist Society. We sort of on the other side, on the Democrats, we'll look to, like the legal professions, or, and whatever, and see how they rate these people as, as judges in the circuit or district level, wherever they are. Just sort of good thinking, as opposed to just having a hard agenda, which they've had on their side, which is we got people we know are going to do exactly these things. How you fix that in the Senate, I really don't know. I mean, the Senate could adopt different rules, but it's not likely, on how they were going to process or, accept nominations for judge, or they could even set up, I think they could even set up an independent commission to vet judges if we wanted to have judges that were really going to balance. But right now, I don't have a solution to that. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. How much do you think the threat to democracy is a motivating factor for people in the election?
It hasn't been registering enough yet in the polling data. I mean, it's there for some people, but I think as things hopefully clarify, toward in the coming months, and Trump says more of these things like, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, and they talk more about, gutting the civil service and having all political hacks renaming. I mean, part of this plan is the Department of Health and Human Services becomes the Department of Life, which is devoted to protecting life from conception. That's one of their objectives. Now, abortion has been a key issue, much more so than preservation of democracy to this point in time in deciding, elections in some red and blue places. So, maybe, people will begin to feel the threat more as the election gets closer. I don't know. I'm certainly going to keep talking about it.
Thank you, Peter, for your perspective this evening. I'd like to shift gears a little bit from the experiences of the history in the House and in Congress generally to a very practical point of view. What are the things that you think about and that you would share for what the people in this community should be doing that we may not have thought about doing, in terms of the campaign and educating people or whatever. I don't know what those things are. That's part one. And part two is, we're ordinary citizens. Many of us here are retired, and like yourself now. And what I'm wondering is, what do we need to do to be as best prepared as we can for a president that doesn't care about the Constitution? Thank you.
Well, we have to not have that president. That's all I can say there. We have to not have that president. After the 16 election, I predicted before Trump had won a primary, he was going to win the election, just because my district was really very reflective of the rest of the country. I have kind of like, with all the rural areas that are economically depressed with the major reductions in the timber industry and timber harvest and all that, the anger and that, and people, he was offering them false hope. You're gonna get your jobs back. You're gonna have a good living again. I'm gonna restore things for you. And unfortunately, I was right. I was still shocked on election day. Night, I thought, oh God, I hope I'm wrong, but I wasn't. Backed into the garage door the next morning. But, people were pretty freaked out. So I said, well, I'm going to do something I haven't done before. I'm going to hold a campaign town hall meeting. And we put out an announcement. First, we got the county courthouse, and then we moved somewhere else. And finally, my staff said, we got to find the biggest place we can get, because the campaign was just getting bombarded with people wanting to come. And so we ultimately got the gymnasium up at LCC, and it was a Sunday morning, and 2,300 people showed up on Sunday morning. And one of the first questions I asked was, I said, how many of you have been actively politically engaged to this point? And it was a minority of the hands. And I said, well, that can't stand. We all have to be actively politically engaged. I've been, people contact me all the time about different things. I've been contacted by a woman locally who's putting together a project to recruit people here, which we did through my campaign, to actually target House districts in other states and do phone calling from here to help in red to blue or swing, or threaten seats. And my campaign did that. In fact, we had incredible volunteers. The high school kids did a great job. And we targeted, when we were trying to take the House back, I think we had 12 members we'd chosen. We educated everybody about the members. Some of them actually got to, they did, put them on the phone and they could hear them talk and that. And 11 of them, I think we did 12, and 11 got elected. So, okay, so we're here, you're in this district. Well, okay, well, I'm Bella's probably going to, I wouldn't take for granted Bella's going to get reelected. It's she's got a credible opponent, and this is still considered a swing district. It's a D+4. And the Republicans have put money here. But we have, the Salinas district. That's going to be a very tough race. That's not very far away. But you don't even have to go there. You can volunteer from here, get in touch with them, and they'll send you what you need, and you can make phone calls and send them back results. For that district. We're trying to get the DeReamer seat back. Now, there's a competitive primary. We don't know who the nominee is going to be. So right here in Oregon, could be the difference between a Democratic House and a Republican House, let alone doing it in other states. So, we can all be engaged, the wonders of the modern world, and volunteer on campaigns that are distant for someone you're interested in and help. The House, to me, I've still got a political action committee, and I'm still raising some money, and I'm putting everything into the House. The Senate, at this point, I just can't see how we're going to keep the Senate, and I'm worried about the presidency, but if we can at least have the House, we've got one bulwark, and then the next election will be much worse for the Republicans for the Senate than this election was, and things could shift pretty quickly. But we need to have something, and the House, to me, is the thing we can have, and that's where I'm going to put all my energy.
Hi. I very much appreciate your, when you were in Congress, your efforts to balance labor and environmental concerns. And trying to formulate a question about money and democracy and how you see it. I want to get you to comment on that. And here's what I mean. One part of what I mean is over the last 5 decades or so, we've been in a class war during which most of the money that has been generated in the United States has gone to the top. And I appreciate your work on, defense of Glass-Steagall, but that to me is the role of money, is what's behind the Heritage Foundation and their effort to kill what's left of the welfare state that FDR and LBJ built, and a lot of people around them built. And that to me is very much a part of what to me is the American political identity. And maybe it's on the left, but it's sort of what I identify with, and what I see you and my father, Charles Porter, who was your predecessor, identified with, and Morse. And it's just evaporating before our eyes because of, your encouragement of the last questioner to get involved. People need to be engaged. SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, was all about that. But how do you do that in the face of the money? I'll stop there.
Sure. Well, I already covered Citizens United a little bit. That was a real huge blow. And then there are things that could be done. What happens is you have C3s and C4s, and C3s are charitable organizations. And what a lot of the dark money does is they give money to a charitable C3, which isn't really charitable, and their name is secret. That's under IRS rules. Because people won't give money to charity if you put their name out. And then the money gets transferred to a C4, which does political stuff, and way beyond what's allowed under the law. Of course, the IRS got burned during Obama because they were accused of just going after right-wing groups and Tea Party groups. So they pulled back on all that. So there are some unenforced rules that could at least make much more obvious where this money is coming from, and therefore we would know the intent, better know the intent. But the other things you talked about more broadly, income inequity, the dominance of Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street is destroying the country. They're destroying industry after industry. That Boeing was killed, they killed people because of, pressure from Wall Street that the CEO was, was sensitive to. They're killing the railroad industry. We used to have the best freight system in the world with so-called precision scheduled railroading. They are now taking over medical practices with private equity. You think private equity wants to have you get a specialist to look at your problem? No, I'm sorry, you can't go to a specialist. They are really gobbling up things that are essential to the American people, let alone all the inequities in the tax system and everything else that we have. That was a passion for me. That was the founding of the Progressive Caucus. I mean, the Progressive Caucus now is the largest caucus. They do everything. But when we founded it, and we could have met in the phone booth, all 7 of us, me, Bernie, Ron Dellums, Lane Evans, Pat Schroeder, a couple others, our whole focus was to deal with the, income inequality, anti-free trade, control of Wall Street. Finally, when Wall Street almost destroyed the economy, well, it did destroy it for a lot of people and took away millions of people's houses in 2008, we couldn't, because of the Senate filibuster, we couldn't even pass a strong reform then. We ended up with a really pablum bill that didn't do a lot, but that's the best that could have been done. That is a huge, huge challenge and an ongoing challenge. And the problem is, people don't get it. I mean, the people who are following Trump think that he is going to do, the guy who gave the disproportionate amount of tax cuts to people who earn over $450,000 a year and you get a penny. Now, this is the guy who's going to right those problems? I mean, yeah, trade, okay, yeah, he's been out there on trade, I mean, I got to agree with a lot of what he said on trade. But other than that, no, it's the old boys club and Wall Street and all that. So it's a huge problem in this country. It's a very huge problem.
You just outlined a litany of things, and with all due respect, I think people do get it, more so than maybe we realize. And I think all of this that you described is riding on a sea of discontentment with the performance of government, and people don't really understand where to place the blame or what to do about it. And, the frightening thing is, I mean, obviously we have an immediate crisis that's going to play out in November. The frightening thing is, are we at the end state of how good our system can be at providing solutions? And you look at the homeless situation, the border crossing, the optic is horrible. I think the thing that is more alarming is that after several years of people being in the country, then we apparently deport 83% of them. I mean, that's an administrative nightmare. So I just wonder, maybe the problem's a lot deeper, and maybe there is no solution. It's rather discouraging.
Well, 3 times, pretty tough immigration reform has been passed in the House. I mean, you had Reagan with amnesty and no penalties on employers, and then everybody just flooded in. Hormel actually bust in illegals so they could bust the unions and the meatpacking plants. I mean, Cesar Chavez would call La Migra and say, there are illegals in this field, get them out, because he wanted to organize people. And so, immigration, we've been close to it, and then you have a regular problem. I mean, there are a lot of people in Mexico and other countries who would come here just to work and want to go home. But they can't, because they're going to have to get smuggled in. It's life-threatening, and they get here and then they're stuck. So that one we came close to solving a couple of times. But I just read a really interesting article that said Obrador is going to decide the presidential election because, and the article said that this reporter was there one day. They were grabbing all these people, throwing them in horrible detention, coming from Guatemala and other places, and shipping them back. And like a week later, no cops on the road, buses flooding north, And he said, Obrador doesn't much like Biden. So, he could control the flow through his country, but he's choosing, for the most part, not to. So, and they're going to use that as a cudgel against Biden. But, I mean, George Bush proposed open borders before 9/11 because the business community wanted it for the workers. And even now, I mean, when I would meet with the people, the nursery owners and all that, we can't get people. The farmers, we can't get people. People, we need people. We need to have a regularized system to bring in those workers and allow them to go home again. But, this Congress isn't going to go there, that's for sure. That's, and I don't know, you mentioned another problem, which I forgot. But.
Sounds like we need every vote we can get, right, in this next election. Here I am.
No, there you are. Hi.
Yeah, so we need every vote we can get. So I want to know what you think about the importance of learning how to talk with the more perhaps moderate Republicans and trying to dialogue with them. I'm a volunteer with Braver Angels, which is trying to have those dialogues with, and I've met some moderate Republicans who voted for Trump and said they will not vote for Trump. But what do you think about, most people don't think it's worth the effort. What do you think about learning to talk with Republicans about the vote this year?
Well, the right-wing nuts, there's only about 40 hardcore ones. A lot of the others are just influenced because they're afraid of their primaries. And I know some of them. And a bunch of them are retiring this year because they're sick of it. No, I would always keep up a dialogue with Republicans. I mean, there was a great little headline in Politico one day, and DeFazio, yell at Republicans, make them your friends. And it's when they're off the edge, I'm like, I get in their face, and when we're getting to a good dialogue, we do things together. I would say, I was a co-founder, co-chair of the House Craft Brewers Caucus. Greg Walton and I founded it. It was for a while, it was the largest caucus in Congress. And I said, it's the last bipartisan thing in this town, but we could get together like McHenry, who was temporary speaker for a while. He got elected as this little twerp, and I thought, this guy's a real jerk. And then, he was into beer because one of the big beer companies built in his district. It wasn't Sierra Nevada, it was the one out of Colorado. But anyway, and so I met him a couple of times, drank a couple of beers together, and I found out, hey, he's not such a bad guy. And actually, when he was temporary speaker, I thought, God, if they can make him speaker, it would be okay, because he's smart. But anyway, they drummed him out. So, yeah, it's worth. Yeah, oh yeah, well, that is definitely worth talking to your neighbors and trying to have those conversations with voters. Yes, definitely. Yeah, but it needs to go on more in Congress too. So. Okay.
Hello.
One more question,
Okay.
Peter, okay? Go right ahead.
Thank you, Peter. Could you say a little bit more about Dictator for a Day and risk of martial law?
Well, the Insurrection Act of 1807, there are, it was in another version of my speech, it didn't make this one, how many, emergency powers the president has, and very few of them require subsequent review or by Congress, and a lot of them are secret. But so there are things beyond the Insurrection Act of 1807 that could be used. FDR put the Japanese and Italians in prison camps. That was, he just used executive authority. The Supreme Court did tell, President Truman he couldn't take over the steel mills, but they didn't do anything about putting people in prison camps. So there are, unfortunately, and particularly if they are using this unitary executive theory, boundless powers, things that we don't really even know about. And they're, part of the heritage thing is we're going to use the military actively on the border, violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, but hey, guess the president can do that. He declares national emergency or something. I mean, emergency powers are scary. Congress has ceded way too much in way too many ways to the presidency. Okay, well, thanks everybody.